Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the state of Minnesota's daily COVID-19 media briefing. We have a series of speakers lined up today, and after each one is done speaking, we'll have a chance for reporters to call in with their questions. Just as a reminder, we'd ask all reporters to please limit themselves to one question each in order to ensure that we get through as many media outlets as possible. So a single question, then with a single on-topic follow-up. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Governor Tim Walz.
Thank you, Teddy. Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Minnesota. We've got some extra speakers on today, and I think it's important to hear from these Minnesotans and from the folks who are working around the issue, especially around education. But we may run a little longer for the media that's on here, but we will stick around as long as we need to answer as many of your questions as we can. We're going to hear the update, and again, as I think many of you are starting to predict, Minnesota's starting to climb that curve, and so we will again have announcements of more positive infections. That's a result of more testing, but also a result of the spread of COVID-19, and again, a large number of fatalities, 21, and we express our deepest sympathies to the families involved. I'll be joined today by Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. Lieutenant Governor and I are on multiple dozens of calls daily. We have not been in the same room since the executive emergency order was issued, but I'm grateful for her leadership, and especially around this issue of early childhood and family well-being. It feels, I know, to many of you that things are accelerating. It could be that it's spring, but also we had major announcements this week around testing. I just got off the phone in the last hour with Vice President Pence, who highlighted for the other governors across the nation the work that Minnesota has done, and that's all of you listening, both on flattening the curve, on thinking on social distancing, and being creative around ways to get the testing done. So the Vice President will visit Minnesota on Tuesday to see firsthand what I asked us to do. I asked us to lead, and Minnesota, you are doing that. I also spent time with over 600 mayors and city leaders this morning who are deeply concerned on their budgets and delivery of services that they need to think about, and then school boards, which brings us to yesterday's announcement around extending distant learning for the rest of the school year. Incredibly hard decision. I know there's a lot of tears shed over this. I've heard stories of athletes setting out on softball diamonds, thinking about what could have been. So please accept my deepest thoughts for all of you on this, that I know it can feel like such an incredible loss, but we've got strong, resilient people with grit and optimism, and we'll get this. But we need to think about how this is impacting communities across the state. I want to thank educators for going to extraordinary length and to flexibility of families and determination and commitment to our children. I want to thank all the folks that make a school run, from bus drivers to the lunchroom, who are still doing those very same things, delivering meals, delivering food, and need to be a part of that school and need to remain with us. I also know the modifications to your teaching make it hard. Distance learning, if it were simple as putting every child in front of a screen, it would be pretty easy, but it's not. Each child is a unique individual. There are multiple learning styles, and our educators know delivering differentiated education in a classroom is an art and a science that makes a difference in lives. And so I just want to be very clear. The options that Minnesota is doing is probably as aggressive as any place in the country, but we need to hear feedback, and we've heard it from students, teachers, parents, administrators, what's working and what's not. And I just want to know to say this, that I know how hard it is. And we've got to figure out, and Lieutenant Governor is going to talk about this, how do we stop exacerbating the inequalities that have been shown through this model, whether it's not having access to broadband or not having the capacity to get the hardware to connect. So Commissioner Ricker is going to focus a little bit today more in depth on the directive that I've given to our administration to start thinking about adjustments. First of all, that investment in relationship building. That relationship between teachers and students is foundational. It's what we all know. There is solid research behind it, but there is an instinctual knowledge of everyone who's been in that classroom and every one of us who has gone through that, who can still remember, like I do, Mrs. Hahn's fourth grade class and the impact it made on me. those are the types of things that are missing now. That screen is not going to replace Mrs. Hahn. That screen is not going to replace that bond that we have in the classrooms or what's happening socially with our students. We need to figure that piece out. Secondly, we need to bridge this technology gap. This isn't e-learning, but many students don't have the basics to broadband and the tech tools. We've got to figure that out. And then we have to lift up student well-being. We talked a lot about vaping and student issues that were told to us by students of symptoms of mental health issues that weren't being addressed. This is just exacerbating that, so we need to deal with that. And to do that, knowing our schools are at the pillars of our community, they provide food, they provide well-being, they're a gathering place, all of those things. I've asked some folks to come talk to us today, and they'll be on in just a minute. Claire Murphy's a 10-year-old student from St. Paul. Lap Wynn is a high school senior. He's the student body president at Rochester John Marshall. He was also our guest when we took most of our cabinet down to look at Rochester John Marshall and a full-service community school and what they were doing. Glazell Toledo is a high school math teacher here in the Metro. Angela Forland's a third-grade teacher from Kingsland. And then, of course, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, who worked with Children's Defense Fund and was a school board member in Minneapolis. But before I have those speakers, I want to just go over just a couple quick things on the testing. We got great excitement today, I think. We've launched a new section on the Minnesota COVID-19 website that'll help Minnesotans locate their testing site. The page includes a self-screening tool, lets you know, hey, should I get tested? And then there'll be a map to show you which clinics, and they will be in real time if they're able to provide you that test right now. The interactive testing site is one of only, I believe, a handful in the entire country. It'll be continuously updated as we stand up more clinics in that capacity. This is get to the goal where you wake up, you're achy, you're coughing, and you're symptomatic. Get online and say, oh, down here 3 miles away or wherever it may be, I can go down and get a test in a safe, efficient manner and get an answer back as quickly as possible. This should really help us as we focused on making sure that we're testing, tracing contacts, then isolating in our communities. Thanks to Minnesota Department of IT and Minnesota Department of Health. Also today, DEED announced they've begun making payments to self-employed people and independent contractors under the new pandemic unemployment assistance. Major milestone, DEED continues to lead the country. We were the first state to get out the volume of checks. We've been the first state to adapt some of these things, and we're one of the first 2 states to implement the CARES Act. It's a brand new program, unemployment insurance, that they've been working around the clock to get it up and running. So those of you who are out there, as I said again, if we get it 99 times out of 100 right, if you're the one, it is catastrophic to your family. So for those self-employed and some of the folks out there who were not part of the safety net system that we had built, you are now. Please, if you've already applied for unemployment, you don't need to call DEED or do anything additional. DEED will contact you proactively. But I know waiting is the worst. So I'm not asking for your patience. I'm just asking you to give us just a brief amount of time and make sure we get those to you. And I also want to mention, I talked to the Vice President on this and was talking to the Chairman of the House Agriculture Committee. We're blessed that Colin Peterson here in Minnesota is on that proactive nature around these plants and making sure they don't spread. Talked to Vice President and Dr. Birx this morning about getting federal assistance to make sure we're helped to get these plants, get them paused, get them cleaned, and then think about what it'll look like when they come back and operate. So these are tough challenges. It's an incredibly tough situation. The excess amount of animals that we have is going to cause challenges, but we're going to have to all work together. I feel confident that the Vice President heard that message today. Having the chairman of the committee working on it should help. And I want to do one thing before I turn it over to Jan and we move to the speakers you want to hear about with education. Last year, I got news that I didn't really want to get, but that was the upcoming retirement of Minnesota Supreme Court Justice David Lillehog. Justice Lillehog has been a fixture of the justice system in Minnesota for a very long time, and he has served the state with great distinction. And I have been committed to continuing that tradition of a merit selection to our courts. So earlier this year, following in the tradition of previous governors, I put together a merit selection panel made up of the leadership from my office, chair of the Commission of Judicial Selection, and at-large members of the commission to solicit applications, review candidates, and recommend finalists to the Supreme Court. I'm excited to announce today that the merit selection panel has recommended 4 candidates to fill the current vacancy on the Minnesota Supreme Court. Judge Diane Brotwald, Judge Jeffrey Bryan, Judge Gordon Moore and John Keller are the finalists. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and myself will be interviewing these candidates soon, and we will make the announcement to the Minnesota Supreme Court here in May. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Commissioner Malcolm to update us on the COVID-19 situation as it stands now. Commissioner?
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be very brief today, primarily just to give you the data and be available for questions later. So the global situation as of early this morning, the total was more than 2.7 million cases around the globe and 191,000 total deaths. That's just for your interest. It's an increase of about 100,000 cases and about 7,000 deaths around the world as of the day before, compared to the day before. In the United States, we're at 869,000 cases and very fast approaching 50,000 total deaths. That's an increase of 27,000 cases over the prior day and 3,000 additional United States deaths. Here in Minnesota, again, as the governor said, we're expecting to see increased numbers each day as the virus proceeds and as we are doing more testing. 244 additional laboratory confirmed cases, bringing us to 3,185 currently. Sadly, an additional 21 of our neighbors have passed away for a total of 221 cumulative deaths in Minnesota from this disease. 18 of these 21 are, again, residents of long-term care facilities, including 16 people total. This is not just the long-term care facilities. The total of 21 deaths includes 16 from Hennepin, 3 Ramsey, 1 Anoka, and 1 in Olmsted County. And demographically, this is 1 person in their 100s, 3 people in their 90s, 6 in their 80s, 7 in their 70s, and 2 in their 60s and 2 also in their 50s with underlying health conditions. As of today, almost 1,600 patients have been released from isolation. 278 are currently hospitalized with 111 in intensive care. So that situation also continues to grow, but at a fairly measured pace at this point in terms of those in hospital. Thank you very much, and back to the governor.
Thank you, Commissioner. At this time, we're joined today by Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, who will have some remarks. We're going to focus our official remarks, of course, around the education piece. The Lieutenant Governor has worked extensively in this area, and she'll be introducing to you folks who are truly out there and living through what distant learning means. So, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan.
Thank you so much, Governor. Good afternoon, everybody. Just as the governor said, this is a really difficult time for folks, and it's going to take all of us to come together to support our schools and our communities. In addition to being the lieutenant governor, I am also the mom of a first grader who is distance learning. We've enjoyed talking to her teachers and having some show and tell, mostly of our senior pets over Google Hangouts. But we've also had some really, really hard days. And I know just based on talking to other parents across the state that this is something that we all have experienced. But for families who do not have access to reliable internet or broadband, or who share a single computer for the entire family, or when there is no technology accessible at all, for parents who are trying to work from home and supervise schoolwork, and for families who have lost 1 or 2 incomes and are struggling to make ends meet, for students who are English language learners, this is even harder. And there's a real spectrum here of distance learning. I think that there are parents who may have a difficult time getting their student to focus or to fill out a worksheet or get the work done. But then there's also families, particularly families of color, who may be worried about absences of their student if they don't have a way to check in with their school or with their teacher, and just the real fear around Child Protective Services or truancy court. And we want to try to put some of those fears at ease. But that is truly the spectrum right now in distance learning. I say this a lot, and so does the governor, but our kids don't come in pieces, and of all the pieces that impact their learning, just as much as they always have, and that is on top of a global pandemic. It's also going to take a real serious look at the inequities that have been in our state that many folks know very well. But these inequities have been further exacerbated by this crisis. I think we've heard some say that COVID-19 is the great equalizer, but that couldn't be further from the truth. What this crisis has done has laid bare the inequities that already existed within our state. We've heard this from legislators, from leaders in the community, from families, and from our school partners. But we can do this, and with smart and dedicated minds from our partners in the legislature and across councils and school organizations and community-led organizations led by communities of color, we can come together to support all of our kids. We also know that an extension of distance learning is especially hard on our students and their overall mental health. Living through this unprecedented time is a traumatic experience. And for those who have experienced trauma before, this is reigniting that trauma in unimaginable ways, especially in communities of color, Indigenous communities, families who are living in poverty, students in greater Minnesota, and so many others. And we cannot leave them behind. Over the last year, we heard over and over again from our students that mental health must be a top priority when we talk about education. And that's now more important than it ever was. And we ask our students to enter an extended period of distance away from their peers, their teachers, and all of the adults who care for them at school. We're also asking teachers to step up in really new and challenging ways. And I want to just take a moment to say this directly to students. You are not alone, and there are people here to help. The governor and I have worked with our agencies to create partnerships to ensure that telehealth is possible for school-length mental health providers. Families should know that mental health providers connected to schools and in the community are open and are taking visits through telehealth. If you are a student needing help, you are not alone. If you are a parent needing help, you are not alone. If you are a caregiver needing help, you are not alone. If you are a teacher needing help, you are not alone. If you are worried about your student or a student worried about your friend, please know that mental health providers are open. If anyone is in crisis, please know that there are folks here who are ready to help. You can text MN to 741-741. Again, text MN to 741-741 at any point, and someone will be in touch with you. Or you can call ** crisis. That's **CRISIS. You can also find additional mental health resources on our COVID-19 website. Before I turn it over to one of our students here, I wanted to just take a minute to say thank you. This is hard, and we know that we are asking a lot. I wanted to give a special thank you to the hourly workers who keep our schools running, from the buses to the lunchrooms. You are a crucial part of our school environment and our community overall. And we know that you'd rather be in school, and it is our expectation that you continue to be paid during this public health crisis that prevents us from being together. So we are grateful for your work. To our educators, our parents, our students, we see you, we hear you, and we value you. We are going to need a lot of folks to come together and help advise us, and that is the plan over the coming weeks here to make sure that our students have what they need, and we are truly focused on our young people in this state during this unprecedented time, and work across communities, across lines of difference to meet the needs of all students It will be challenging. It will not be perfect, but we can do more, and we certainly can do more together. So to every student, every teacher, and every caregiver, every parent, I know you are doing your absolute best, and that's all that we can do. So thank you. And with that, it is my very distinct pleasure to be able to introduce to you Claire Murphy, who is a 10-year-old from St. Paul. Claire?
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Claire Murphy. I'm a 5th grader at Expo Elementary School in St. Paul. I wasn't surprised when I heard that we aren't going back to school this school year, but I'm still feeling sad. I'm going to middle school next year, and I didn't get to say goodbye to my teachers or friends. Doing school from home is going pretty well for me. I get work done every day, and I have my mom and dad to help. I'm not a huge fan of it. I'd rather be in school so I can talk to my teachers in person when I have questions instead of using Google Meet or email. Sometimes I get frustrated because I get disconnected from the internet when I'm trying to finish my assignments, or I get distracted by my little brother. He's kind of loud and he likes to run around the house. Art is much harder because I don't have as many materials at home as we have at school. In science, I don't get to do as many experiments as I do in class or see a lizard. His name is Slayer. I can go outside, but it's not the same as having gym class, and lunch with my mom, dad, and brother is the same as being in the lunch room with my friends. The best part of distant learning so far was the 5th grade parade our teachers and principals did for us. They drove past every 5th grader's house and decorated cars and vans, and it made me feel good because I know they miss me like I miss them. It's hard. We've never had to do this before. My parents have never had to do this before. But we want to stay healthy, safe, and make sure our family, friends, and neighbors stay healthy and safe too. We can do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Next, we'd like to turn it over to Lap Wynn, who is a high school senior in Rochester, Minnesota. Go ahead.
Hello, and good afternoon, Minnesota. Before I begin, I would just like to send my deepest sense of gratitude to all the healthcare professionals, essential workers, and teachers across the state. Additionally, thank you so very much to Governor Walz, his administration, and the Minnesota State Legislature for your diligent responses to this ever-evolving crisis. I believe that this pandemic may have brought the worst of Mother Nature, but in turn has pushed forth the best in everyone. As a student, but more importantly as a senior, I have seen my supposed best year of high school canceled. Despite that, however, staff members at my schools, and I'm with great certainty schools across the entire state and country, continue to try their very best to continue education through distance learning and foster community and support. And I would just like to highlight some of my experiences thus far. What I've noticed is schools continue to be a foundational pillar for our community, and distance learning is an additional aspect of that. From providing meals to our students, to providing the support that many of them need to learn and continue to take in new information even during these trying times, schools are essential, especially in regards to my teachers who continue to check in with me and my fellow students and was willing to showcase themselves, their senior year selves, in a hilarious video. And so it is that level of support that many students are getting, and it has greatly helped them cope with the loneliness and isolation and possible depression of this crisis. However, distance learning and this model also highlights some of the flaws that we already have, and I hope that Governor Walz and his administration and the state legislature will try to find ways to mitigate this. Governor Walz has already alluded to this, and that is, it has highlighted the great inequities within our system, including the access to internet, but more importantly, an access to an environment that is suitable for learning to occur. Some students do not have the privilege or have the ability to have a quiet space simply to study. and that is really hurting some of our communities. Additionally, students with special needs have been hit quite hard, and I know this from firsthand experience as my brother has ADHD. My mother and I have been trying our very best to help him learn and take in the material, all the while trying to figure out ways to help alleviate the distractions of home life. Additionally, my fellow ESL students have found it more difficult as the language barrier continues to be a bulwark against nuanced understanding of the material. And so it kind of highlights the necessity of interaction in our educational model and kind of highlights the importance that educators play in the roles of shaping children's lives. And so I just wanted to highlight some of that experience and just to sincerely say thank you to all the teachers who have helped make this transition a little bit easier. With that, I would also like to address the most recent news of Governor Walz's difficult decision to continue distance learning for the rest of the year, and this kind of goes to my fellow classmates of class of 2020. I know that these are trying times, and I know that the cancellation of the rest of senior year hits hard. I very much feel it myself, but remember, this is not the end of our journey. The memories and experiences that we have shared are ours to keep and cherish forever. This may be one of the defining moments of our generation, that in the depths of separation and isolation, we are able to overcome that and grow closer together. Social media, for what it's worth, is our gateway to connectedness. So continue to send out those Snapchat stories. Continue to post your college decisions on Instagram. Continue to reach out to that fellow classmates over Hangouts, over FaceTime, or whatever app works. Because at the end of the day, we are still a community of scholars, and we are still in this together. To my fellow seniors, we will get through this, and we will emerge on the other side more resilient, more tenacious, and more ready to face the challenges of tomorrow. Thank you so very much to Governor Walz for giving me this opportunity to address my fellow classmates and to share some of my ideas.
Thank you so much, Lap. Our next speaker is Glazelle Toledo, a high school math teacher in the West Metro. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Glazelle Toledo. I am a high school math teacher in Intermediate School District 287. We are a specialized school district that serves the top 1% of highest needs students from 11 school districts in the West Metro. Before the COVID-19 crisis, educators across Minnesota and the nation have bore witness to the glaring inequities our students and working families face every day. This pandemic has just brought us those injustices into today's harsh spotlight. I work with students who have extraordinary mental health needs. Some have experienced childhood trauma, including race-related trauma and community violence. Others have been homeless or suffer from mental illness. At school, we are their lives. But now, during distance learning, I can't get in touch with many of them or get them to engage in their schoolwork. It's not because they don't want to. It's because of necessity. Many of them are picking up extra hours at work to help their families make ends meet or have needed to become full-time caregivers for their siblings. My students can't get the medical or mental health support they need. Our education system hasn't provided the academic opportunities our students deserve. They are unable to find stability in their lives, and their futures are full of worry and question marks. Today's circumstances only exacerbate these barriers, and this hits home to me both personally and professionally. I am a teacher, and I am Filipina. The data is showing, and we are seeing, that Asian Pacific Islanders and Asian businesses are suffering at a disproportionately higher rate with the increased number of unjust attacks during this pandemic, reported and not reported. The first week when our schools were closed, I spent that week calling a number of our students of color and all of our Asian students to check in with them and make sure they and their families were doing okay. Here in Minnesota, discrimination and violence is happening. Unfortunately, I know this from personal experience. I was targeted by strangers asking me, "What kind of Asian are you?" while I was walking my dog. My children want to go outside. They want to see their friends. They want to participate in sports. But like me, they are cautious and afraid of what can happen going outside Asian. I am ever more worried about all the discrimination and violence during this pandemic, not only for them, but for myself, my family, my friends, and my students. Each day I have promised myself I will try to go outside without fear. Know that I am scared, but I cannot, should not, and will not let these events of hatred towards Asians during this time reign over my life. My hope is the work so many of us are trying to do to ensure all Minnesotans, no matter what we look like or where we come from, can succeed, isn't derailed during these uncertain times. It should strengthen our resolve to make sure our schools and communities are places where everyone can thrive and live joyful lives. Please be mindful and interrupt COVID-19 racism when you see it. Please model good behavior, especially for our children. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those important words. Our next speaker is Angela Forland, who's a third grade teacher in Kingsland, Minnesota. And Angela, I just want to make sure that you take yourself off mute here.
Good afternoon. My name is Angela Forland, and I'm a third grade teacher at the Kingsland Public School in Spring Valley, Minnesota. I also have two children in grades 3 and 1. Distance learning is uncharted territory for most Minnesota educators, our students, and our parents. But the challenges are even greater for those who don't have access to high-speed internet or who have poor connections at home. My family understands this all too well. We live this every day. I live outside of Spring Valley and have such poor internet connections at home that I was getting up at 1 a.m. in the morning to get my work done. I could not access my Google Classroom, my videos, my email, or comment on my students' class questions because my internet was not working. It crashed about 7 a.m. every morning. The rest of the day, I would try to work using a mobile hotspot or a cellular data, but I couldn't be as available for my students as I wanted to be. I could not get into my Google Classroom. I was not able to use Zoom. I couldn't grade assignments, answer questions, comment back to my students, or even load my videos or my assignments. The lack of the stable internet connection also affects my children. My daughter, who is a third grader, would get up at 5 o'clock to do her schoolwork, also working in Google Classroom and watching the videos that we were using for instruction. I considered switching to the only other internet provider available to us in our rural community. I had it all scheduled and was willing to pay the $1,200 for it. But after talking to several of my neighbors who went this route, I canceled this installation. They told me the service wasn't going to be much better than what we already have. After 2 weeks of hazard sleep schedules and mounting technical frustrations, we had to give in. I am back at school working from my classroom. When I come into school, my kids, my own children, get their work done. When they're finished with their work, they're bored and they want to go outside or visit with their SAC kids who are down the hall. But they have to be in my room. They also want to be in every Zoom meeting that I have with my own students. My children aren't the only ones in our community trying to navigate the spotty connections or the lack of the internet entirely. I had a student whose broadband went down. Their family waited 4 days for it to get back up and running, and now it is slower than it was before. This student is now a week behind her peers and feels like she is never going to catch up. Little or no access to technology and internet is just one of the barriers that students in our area face and are to complete their assignments, and educators also face these challenges to serve our students during the school closures due to COVID-19. Now more than ever, our Minnesota needs to invest in connecting all parts of the state to reliable broadband services. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Education Commissioner Mary Cathryn Ricker.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, for your commitment to our students and our families. We are really lucky in Minnesota to have a governor and lieutenant governor who prioritize education as the pair of you do. So thank you so much. And thank you to our educators and students who shared their stories today. Claire and Lep, it was great to hear your voice again, and your stories really matter. Thank you for sharing them with Minnesotans. As we've heard from our speakers today, distance learning has been hard on everyone, even when everyone is trying to do their best. And while educators across our state are going above and beyond to still reach and teach their students, we know that school closures put burdens on students and families and disproportionately are impacting communities of color, as well as Indigenous, immigrant and refugee, low-income families and communities, and students with disabilities and their families. Our students deserve our best efforts to ensure they are receiving the education, relationships, and connections they deserve, even during these times, perhaps especially during these times, and even when it seems impossible. We should be doing more, and we will be doing more. As a teacher, I am well aware that the key to success in the classroom is being able to reflect and make modifications to improve my teaching until everyone in my class is getting it. This is also true for our distance learning plans. Throughout the distance learning period, the Minnesota Department of Education has continually assessed what is working and what is not, and has offered additional guidance and support wherever possible. Our administration has prioritized hearing from students, teachers, paraprofessionals, parents and families, administrators, and community leaders, and the feedback was clear. We know distance learning hasn't been going perfectly. It's actually been really hard. So just like I would in the classroom, I instructed my team at MDE to start making some improvements so we can reach each and every student in the state of Minnesota. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the additional supports that educators, students, and their families can expect from the Minnesota Department of Education in this next phase of distance learning. First, as you heard the governor say, we are recommitting to intentional relationship building. Students, I can tell you from all the educators I have talked to that the adults in your school communities miss you. And families, I commit to you that our support for you will improve. Relationship building with students and families is at the center of any equitable distance learning plan. During this distance learning period, those relationships have been put to the test. And so we have collected examples and expertise of what is working, and we are sharing it. We'll be partnering with experts in the field so educators and students are receiving the support they need to build on the relationships with their students and thus boost their learning. MDE has planned webinars to assist teachers across the state in how to modify their instruction during distance learning and for us to be that resource for our educators. 2, while not all distance learning plans are online learning plans, we know disparities with student access to broadband and technology exist, and they are felt across the state. That's why the Education and Child Care Working Group has been working with public and private partners to create options to get broadband access and devices into the hands of every student who still does not have them, and why this will be our highest priority for some of our new federal dollars. We know this will take lots of people working together to make this a reality, including working with our legislators. Representatives Richardson and Eklund both have legislation that addresses this concern, and we need to move these through the legislature. Know that we will leave no stone unturned to try and make this happen for our students. We plan to launch big and small partnerships that allow everyone, from individuals wanting to help tutor and read to students, to nonprofits meeting wraparound needs of our students and families, to large companies contributing resources. It will take all of us working together, and there is no more important mission. No matter what, every child deserves a world-class education. And even during this unprecedented time, we are committing to doing everything we can to provide the best education possible. And third, teaching has never been a solitary effort. There are so many adults in our students' lives who would normally see them on a regular basis. Their teacher, paraprofessionals, principals, coaches, music teachers, bus drivers, all of them care about the well-being of our students. Distance learning has solidified what some of us already know. Schools are not just educational spaces. They are also social spaces. They are emotional spaces. They are places where students do more than grow academically. I know with distance learning, there are fewer adults in our students' lives keeping a pulse on their wellness, their progress, or just checking in on their day. That's why MDE will be partnering with different interagency groups and community organizations so that every student still has many adults in their lives checking in on them, communicating with families, and focusing on student well-being. In order to do all these things well, we will need districts and charter schools to partner with us and provide us with accurate data about your school's needs so we can best enhance our support to our students together. We'll be launching other initiatives and supports along the way, so please stay tuned for us to announce those things as well. And I want families to know your voices and experiences matter, and we want to keep hearing them. If parents or families have questions about their distance learning plan, they should contact their individual schools. And if they have additional questions for the Minnesota Department of Education, they can reach us by phone at 651-582-8200. Or they can email their questions at covid-19.questions.mde@state.mn.us. And we'll be sharing out that phone number and that email again. 651-582-8200, and the email covid-19.questions.mde@state.mn.us. We did not make the decision to extend distance learning for the rest of the school year lightly, but we know that it's the right one for the health and safety of our students and educators. And with these additional focuses, we hope to continue improving distance learning and bring more support to students, families, and educators during this extraordinary time. Thank you so much for your collective efforts to better meet the needs of our students and our children in the state of Minnesota.
Thank you, Commissioner. Governor Walz, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And to Minnesotans, I think you heard it. The magnitude of this decision is huge. The impact it has on children and families certainly can't be understated. And I wanted to make sure today, while this sounds a little bit different, we had a little bit from Commissioner Malcolm on health. The COVID-19 pandemic is always still about people and the impact it has on people. And as I talked about yesterday, my responsibility is around the health, safety, and well-being of Minnesotans. And I can assure you, and I want you to know, we are continually reassessing everything we're doing, and we are not going to be afraid and sugarcoat things that can't be. Minnesotans deserve to hear where things are at. We're going to talk openly and candidly. Many states didn't even attempt to try something like this because of, I just think, the magnitude of it, but we believe that it's worth it. We believe we're learning, we're hearing, as you heard from each of these speakers. So with that, I want to open it up to questions. And again, I remind folks that we'll try and stay on a little longer. I thought it was really important to hear directly from the people impacted. And it's difficult to hear some of these stories. It's difficult to know when folks like Glazel and others are experiencing the types of behaviors that we're seeing, and we keep talking about that. It's hard to hear when you hear a fifth grader thinking about going to middle school without saying those goodbyes, or a senior student body president and leader in that school, and all of the changes they were making, and watch those just come to an abrupt end. So I know these are hard conversations, but that's what Minnesotans do. We have hard conversations, and then we find solutions. So let's open it up for questions.
Operator, we're ready for questions.
All right, thank you. For those who want to ask a question, please press star then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. To withdraw your question, please press the pound key. Again, to ask a question, please press star then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Our first question comes from the line of Erin Hassanzadeh from WCCO. Your line is now open.
Hello, my question is about attendance rates for distance learning. I'm not sure if this is for Commissioner Ricker or the governor. Do we have any early indications on how many students are checking in, or any particular areas we're worried about?
Yeah, Commissioner, do you want to take that? We do, and we get those numbers. Go right ahead.
Yes, thank you, Governor, and thank you for your question. We are regularly asking districts. I would say the first thing we asked districts as they were rolling out their distance learning plans is if they would keep us posted on students they are not hearing from and how they were improving those numbers, getting a hold of students day by day. And so we've been working on that. One of the earliest indications we have of some attendance successes have been in our full-service community schools, where one of the tenets of full-service community schools is actually relationships with students and families, and they are seeing some attendance successes.
And I think as far as the individual districts, we do see some differences. I'm not looking at those numbers right in front of us, but that may be something that we want to get out there. But I do think I only caution around that because we are concerned, as Lieutenant Governor spoke about, there are families that the students aren't checking in because they don't want to. It may be because they can't. And there's the concern around the well-being of those children, but also the well-being of the families and how they're being viewed. But if that is something that we need to get, Commissioner, how we normally share those in a pre-COVID environment, we may want to get those out because we're trying our best to figure that out, even in the complexity of it. But I think we all know it's hard. I'm going to speak from experience. I'm pushing every day to get mine on when he needs to get on, and I'm sure there's other parents experience this, that it's tough.
That's right, Governor. And attendance has been a focus of not accountability, but more out of wellness. And that's why the focus has been on tracking the number of students that school districts or charter schools have not successfully connected with, and wanting to continue to reduce that number and share out practices for how people have been connected with their students.
No, thank you. Thanks for the question.
All right, our next question comes from the line of Brian Bax from Minnesota Public Radio News. Your line is now open.
Hi, Governor. You have some pretty important decisions coming down the pike as soon as next week regarding the stay-at-home order and the public accommodations, restaurants, bars, and the like. Some of your governors in your regional compact have already stretched them into mid to late May, including Michigan today to May 15th. Can you tell us where you're at, what you're weighing, and when you'll announce what you're going to do?
Yes, and I understand for folks that uncertainty in this time is like the worst, and that opens up space where the confusion or potentially rumors. We're trying to get that out as quickly as possible. I think yesterday's announcement that we made around how we're making the decisions, the announcements on trying to bring on some businesses back online, and we kind of showed our dials and our decision making around that Venn diagram of well-being, health, social distancing, and of course safety. So I want to stress again the regional compacts. We use those to share information. We get on the phone every couple of days in the evening, the governors, their chief of staffs, and to talk about and update others where we're at. As I've said, I don't want to be driven by an arbitrary date or arbitrary numbers. I want to see how Minnesota's responding. I think there's something unique here, and I'm going to have the social scientists dig into this. There's a certain set of social responsibilities that Minnesota seems to be exhibiting. In the past, we've had higher voting numbers than any place in the country. We also give more per capita to charity than anybody else. Now, I'm not trying to Minnesota exceptionalism here that we're better than anybody, but it does seem to say something about how we view community and how we view adhering to them. At this point in time, we seem to have done pretty well on social distancing. And I think with the lack of a one national strategy or a guideline, or, if you're not to this number, there's no way, I think each state's going to have to try and come up with that. It is my hope that we give some lead time, certainly to the middle of next week. We're going to have some thoughts, but I think I could preview, if you look at that, bars and restaurants, for example, are quite a ways on that social setting dial. Single-family gatherings, potential houses of worship, those are further down on the dial. And so I think we're going to look at the data that's out there. We're going to see what our testing charts to show. It's at a time when we are climbing. I think the numbers are showing the peak is probably later into May, but it looks like we're climbing. So my pledge to Minnesotans is to continue to transparently show how we're thinking through these things, and then try and give as much lead time as possible. But I do want to make clear is that we are not tied to or running in concert with the states in the compact. We're simply sharing best practices and alerting to one another, and then seeing if that makes sense. So I think you can expect sometime middle of next week that we'll be making that decision.
And Governor, on that point, there are some legislatures and Republican legislators who say that mom and pop stores and Main Street businesses aren't getting a fair shake when big box retailers are open and they're not. Is that valid?
It is valid. I don't know about a fair shake. I think it's that we're trying to figure out how to do this. There isn't a set in stone that this would happen. I think we're trying to look at what does it mean to have social distancing in square footage. We talked about those highly predictable and smaller size setting. I think that's a valid point they're making, and I think it's one of the reasons why we're probably operating very differently than other states that have, in certain states they said until we have X number of percentage of tests, until we have 14 days of declining infection rates based on that testing, we're not going to make a move. We've not said that because I don't think it applies to every situation. But I think we're in a more nuanced spot. I think those voices that are out there, I'm absolutely with them. The sooner we can safely get back in, but you have to have a systematic way to do that. And that's exactly what we're looking at. That's why we think there's the potential there will be 20,000 more businesses up to 100,000 people that we think can safely social distance, safely monitor in a highly predictable setting in their workplace, be back to work before the end of the stay-at-home order. So it's a valid point, and it's exactly what we're working on. But again, I tell people, if we get this wrong, if we rush, it will only prolong what we're doing. And if we have to shut down again, which we may have to turn that dial left, it's much better if we have a step-by-step strategic way. And if you look at that, those smaller businesses, single shops, those are on the dial right up from where we're at. So I think it should be an expectation. We're thinking of that and talking about that with them. And as you saw yesterday with the folks from Rydell Skate, they put together a very extensive plan that hits on all the things. I think that's exactly what we're looking for. And every day I think that will accelerate.
All right, the next question comes from the line of Bill Werner from Minnesota News Network. Your line is now open.
Thank you, and thank you, Governor, for taking the question. I look on a regular basis on the dashboard, and the hospital surge capacity and some of the critical care supplies. You know the numbers today for the ICU beds versus our capacity and what you can bring online quickly, right?
That's right.
Are you considering doing that at any point soon? We're at about 900, right, in terms of ICU beds versus about 1,200 capacity. What's your general comfort level on the state's readiness? You know, I'm talking about the box, 3,000 to 5,000 box, and where does the peak come? And that, and also the N95s and the other PPEs. What is your comfort level?
No, it's a great question, and and I appreciate it, Bill, and I hope all the listeners out there today use that. That's exactly what that website was for, to have you start asking and the people to start internalizing what's out there. I would answer to your question, it's guardedly optimistic. I say that just because of the feedback we're getting from hospitals. I think the PPE supply chain issue is becoming a little more clarified. I am certainly not comfortable. I certainly know that when this is all over, the state itself will, working with the legislature, we will create our own strategic stockpile that will be stored at Camp Ripley or wherever makes sense. With that being said, I do believe as of today, I think those decisions to bring on the added capacity in the existing hospitals, or if there would be a need to bring on our alternate care facilities that are approved, ready, and are operational, as Joe Kelly said today, that we don't ever want to have to cross our fingers on things. We want to know that that's there. And as of today, I feel confident we could do that. And I think the frontline healthcare workers and the decision makers there, they will be the ones to help inform me when they say, now is the time. We're flashing yellow. Most of our state is still in green. A couple areas are yellow. Once we start getting that flashing yellow, that's when it's time to start making those decisions. But as of today, I feel confident that anyone who would need critical care in a hospital would get it.
Do you feel, Governor, just one quick follow-up, do you feel that the state is on track to hitting the goals that it needs to? I'm talking about the 3 to 5K box, and all those. Because that'll give you some degrees of freedom in terms of some of these other decisions, I assume, in terms of reopening.
You're exactly right. The decision-making around the supplies of PPE and hospital space are playing into the decision matrix we're working through right now on elective surgeries. We want to do elective surgeries, but if we burn up all the PPE and the space, and then the surge comes and we put ourselves and ruined all of the space that we bought for this. At this point in time, I feel like we are moving there. I wished I could speak with 100% confidence. I don't think you probably ever could, but especially now. The problem is just exacerbated in these supply chains when hotspots spring up and they jump on those. I think the reason I feel optimistic too is that as I watch and talk to other governors, Governor Cuomo thinks they're plateauing. How long that plateau lasts, I guess, is yet to be seen. But that opens up a whole lot of things that are then able to be put to other parts of the country. And I spent time on the call with Vice President Pence. As I said, he'll be here on Tuesday. The call today felt that there was much more control across all the governors. It felt like there was much more a sense of certainty where things were being moved. So I think I can answer, Bill, that I do feel comfortable. I mean, to be honest with you, I think the only way I'd feel totally comfortable is if I had every one of those supply needs stocked in a warehouse here in Minnesota instead of in transit or being moved. But that's just simply the way it's working. So we're confident. You need the care, you'll get it.
Thank you, Governor.
The next question comes from the line of Theo Keith from Fox 9. Your line is now open.
Hi, Governor. Understanding, of course, that you probably weren't being exact and specific when you mentioned earlier about this new website where you can find testing locations that someone could wake up and go within 3 miles of them and get a test. But I am looking at the map, and there are at least 20 counties that don't have a testing site. On the north side of Minneapolis, there's only 2 testing sites. Those could potentially be overwhelmed if they don't have enough testing capacity there. So when is it that this testing capacity is going to be increased, that more testing sites are going to become available, and we'll see every county in the state have a testing site.
Yeah, and it's my answer has to be, Theo, just as soon as possible. But you're absolutely right. That's the problem of and people have found out. The one thing was to say we signed a deal that we had the capacity to do the test, but Commissioner Malcolm was really clear yesterday. That doesn't do people a lot of good if they don't have a place where that sample can be collected. Because what we're basically saying is if we can collect the samples and we can get it to the lab, we can do 20,000 of those a day. Then it's going to be critical, though, how did you get the sample taken? How did you do it without burning through a bunch of PPE? And how quickly are you going to be able to do the contract tracing of them? So it's our hope, as we said, this is a sense of urgency around it. It's going to take a few weeks to get out all the way, but you're absolutely right. To get this done right and to be ready for the second wave or to weather this thing out, there needs to be a site in relative easy location in Canandaigua County, or it needs to be a drive-through location that people can get to. Those are all things that we're still building out. And again, what I'm challenging my team is this needs to be done. I mean, as a country, we should have been done a couple months ago, and now we're racing time. Let's do it. So keep checking back on that. I'm challenging my team that this needs to be weeks where everybody who's symptomatic, they wake up in the morning, they've got aches, they got a cough, they got a fever. We're telling them, get tested so that we can quarantine and do that. They don't need to be driving 100 miles, and they don't need to be telling, no, you can't get a test. So as quick as possible, I'm hoping within the next few weeks here, and our goal was to race before May 4th, obviously, was a deadline we kind of set for ourselves to be able to reevaluate.
Thank you.
The next question comes from the line of Matt Sapik from Minnesota Public Radio News. Your line is now open.
Hi there. This question is for Commissioner Malcolm and possibly for Chris Ayersman, if you're on the line, Chris. I saw that the Board of Nursing sent out an email yesterday looking for additional staff to help out at long-term care facilities. Exactly how many nurses and other staff are needed at these facilities? Is there an acute shortage now, or is this in anticipation of a shortage?
Hi, this is Commissioner Malcolm. I'll start and ask Chris to join in. I do believe she's on the call. I don't have a specific number for you. I don't think any of us have a specific number, but we're just very, very aware of the staffing situation that exists in long-term care, that frankly existed in long-term care before this crisis. And now as we see staff falling ill, and the intensity of staff that we're asking the facilities to beef up around infection control and other things, it's kind of the perfect storm in the sense of it was already a stressed workforce. A lot of people in the workforce are becoming ill, and we need for them absolutely to be protected and not in the facilities. So we want to be prepared to, and we've already seen some facilities that have a day-to-day difficulty maintaining services. So we've been working very hard to get, and our healthcare partners have been great. Folks from nearby hospitals and other places helping to step in to provide emergency staffing as needed. But we are trying to build up more capability so that we can build a more durable system for moving staffing where it needs to be rather than trying to solve each emergency each day as it comes. But Chris, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll just mention that as we've talked about before, we have teams that are working with facilities, and part of that is looking at healthcare worker, both healthcare workers who are positive as well as healthcare workers who may have been exposed. And as we work through the process of identifying who cannot work because of the COVID risk that they would pose to residents, we have noted that, yes, there are staffing needs. So we are working, as the commissioner said, to identify facilities, as we're continuing to monitor their status to say, wow, this is a group of facilities that could be coming up on a problem. We have a team that we work with in the State Emergency Operations Center, and they're bringing together partners to address the issue. But this has been something that we've been seeing for a while now, and obviously, you've been made aware of that with specific facilities. But yeah, we want to have a more robust system to be able to address this because we're seeing it now, even with limited testing, and we know that as testing becomes more available, we're going to see it as a greater issue. And so the goal is to get ahead of the situation. And so the Board of Nursing did a nice job of putting out a request.
And just to follow up on that, how many staff at long-term care facilities have tested positive for COVID-19 and are unable to work as a result of that?
So right now we have 172 facilities that have a case, that represent an outbreak, a situation. We have 820 resident cases, and we have had 303 healthcare worker cases. Now, keep in mind that has been over the span of several weeks, and so some of those healthcare workers would have recovered, but that represents the number of healthcare workers who have had to be excluded because of being positive for COVID. But we also have situations where healthcare workers have the type of exposure in which they need to be excluded as well, and so that compounds the situation.
Can you say what percentage of healthcare workers or long-term care facility workers, I should say, are unable to work?
No, I can't give you a percentage, but as we've alluded to, even having this number of cases in healthcare workers, we are experiencing challenges within the system. The staffing in this particular aspect of healthcare has been precarious, as the commissioner said, prior to COVID, and then with the limitations on staffing because of the disease, that has made it that much more challenging.
Okay, thank you.
The next question comes from the line of Jeremy Olson from Star Tribune. Your line is now open.
Hi, I have a more education-focused question. Yesterday and today, I've heard a lot of talk about emphasis on maintaining relationships between educators and students. And I mean, as a parent myself, I think that's terrific, but what I really want is for my student to know, like, the quadratic equation or a prepositional phrase. Can you connect the dots for me? How does relationship building translate to education, learning and educational achievement? Are we just kind of treading water by building relationships until we can teach this stuff later on, or is it actually leading to students learning?
Jeremy, it's a great question. I'm going to have Commissioner Ricker lean into that. The answer is yes, that it does. Instruction is tied closely to the relationship side. I'll let Commissioner do that, but I hear the question you're asking, because this is the one I've asked. If it were that easy, we would put our kids in front of a computer and they could learn everything they needed about geometry, about geography. But what we know is, and there's a reason why, classroom instruction is still the preferred method. It's because of this bond on relationship. So, Commissioner, would you like to address that, or one of our teachers maybe too?
Absolutely. Why don't I quickly address it, and we can kick it to one of our educators on the phone today, too. Thank you, Governor. Thank you so much for this question. I very much appreciate that you picked up that relationships in our schools are important to us, and very important that the Minnesota Department of Education supports relationship building, relationship maintenance. And there is a really old adage in education, and that is students don't care what you know until they know you care. And as I explained yesterday, too, and on several occasions, that our best teaching and learning conditions meet the academic needs of students, the social-emotional needs of students, and do so in a safe and welcoming environment. And so to get to those academic needs as effectively as possible, students have to know that they are seen and heard, and that they would be missed if they were gone from that classroom or from that school. The more a student feels a connection to a school community, and certainly to the teachers, to the paraprofessionals, to the high school principal or to their assistant principal, to the school clerks and the nutrition service professionals and the custodians, the more the student is excited about everything we have to share. And so they are so interwoven, and those are just the ways we see them manifest themselves in an academic situation. But I love the governor's idea of offering the educators on the phone some examples as well.
I can actually attune to that. I have some students who, when they were in the classroom, were really struggling with really wanting to be in the classroom, and yet those are my students that when I am on a Zoom conference with them are the most excited and passionate about talking with me, but also the ones that stress how much they want to be back in my classroom. And so I do feel like this distance learning and not being able to see our kids every single day and have that one-on-one or even that group-to-group or peer-to-peer interaction is also a struggle for them, especially those that do struggle, because they can't learn from each other also as easily online as they can if they are in our classrooms.
Hi, is it okay if I offer a student perspective here?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yes. So I think the most important thing we have to understand is, yes, learning the quadratic equation or any of those concepts are important, and you can just go on Google and search it up, but it won't stick in your head. The most valuable thing for a student is to have a teacher that cares about them. And when a teacher cares about them, they can adapt and adjust their way of explaining the concepts to the students that a machine or anything else cannot. And so I think that is one of the benefits of distance learning, and the level of dedication that I've seen from my teachers, especially in trying to make the concepts digestible and understandable, even if I am not in the classroom, has been amazing to watch, and has actually allowed me to continue learning as if I'm still in the classroom. And so I think it's the relationship that has to be fostered first before the students can learn and understand the material, because too often I think we focus too much on the standards and how we can get as much information to a student's head as possible, and so we do this through kind of very concrete mechanical ways. But the truth is, for a student to understand a concept, it has to be taught to them in a way that they can understand and that is personable to them. And so the people who know them best, that can teach them best, are the teachers themselves. And so I think that continuing distance learning, for all its flaws, it's maintaining those contacts and those relationships, and that's really helpful for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Lab. And operator, we only have time for one more question today.
Could I still address that last question?
Sure, go ahead quickly so we can get in one more.
Okay. I just wanted to say this morning I actually did the quadratic formula with one of my students who was having difficulty understanding it. So there are ways and there are situations in which those things can be done. Yes, the relationship with the student, we need to build those so that we can work with each other online to get through our material. But unfortunately, material is not, the concepts are not as important as the relationships as we see some of our students are really currently struggling.
Thank you. Operator, one more question.
All right, for our last question, comes from the line of Dana Ferguson from Foreign News Service. Your line is now open.
Thank you. I have a question for Director Erisman. I'm wondering if you can provide an update on the number of workers at the processing plants in Worthington, Windham, and Wilmer who've been confirmed to have COVID-19, and is there testing going on at other facilities at this point?
Yes, this is Chris Erisman. So we are working with a number of facilities in different parts of the state. As you're aware, there has been testing that is ongoing, that's happening in Worthington. And we have also been working with a number of other plants, talking with them, working with local public health to discuss the appropriate next steps in terms of testing. And I can get you information about the number of cases that we're seeing, provide that offline if you want to reach out to our media folks.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana. And Governor, I'll turn it over to you for your final thoughts before we have to wrap today.
Well, thank you, Teddy. Thank you all. to our guests today who are on our teachers and students, thank you. Thanks for sharing a candid and authentic assessment. To Minnesotans out there listening on so many different areas of this COVID-19, we wanted to spend a little more time today on this important issue of education. Our commitment is to continue to try and make sure every child receives the best quality education, to continue to assess what we're doing and as the situation evolves. And I just want everybody to know that I can't stress enough that some of the sense of loss around this is just really hard. My wife Wynn and I were speaking. One of the great privileges we had for many years was we were senior class advisors. And one of the job, in fact, it's the last job you do as the senior class advisor, you escort the senior class to the graduation ceremony. And as they walked through, we shook hands with each and every one of them and to congratulate them. It sticks with me. I know the names of many of them still to this day. And those moments on that football field, on those beautiful May nights, the memories that were made with family are going to be denied to the class of 2020. And I think it's up to all of us here in Minnesota to ensure that we give them our very best. We do all we can to not just ensure that they understand those important concepts which they need, but that piece of how important they are to the fabric of our state, our community, and our country. So you have our commitment to keep working on this. We're starting a new section for it, and we will get there together. So thank you all, and I hope everyone has a chance to enjoy a little bit of time outside this weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's conference call. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect. Presenters, please stay on the line for our post-conference. 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 Post-conference.